Hey, everybody, welcome in. It is a Tuesday mailbag edition of the Utopia Football Podcast. My name is Sean Pendergast. I am one half of Payne and Pendergast on Sports Radio 610. As many of you know, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. weekdays is where you can find me and original Houston Texans Seth Payne. These days, largely chopping it up about the Houston Texans' upcoming season, the Houston Texans' current training camp practices, the Houston Texans playing the Pittsburgh Steelers in a preseason game this Friday, which will be the first game for the Steelers, the second preseason game for the Houston Texans. And these days, very little, or I guess just lamenting about the Houston Astros and what they've been doing lately. But this is an Astros-friendly zone. If you want to get in with Astro topics in the mailbag, you guys know that I'm certainly open to that. As we kick off this edition, it's been a few days since I've dropped a podcast on you guys. The post-game edition of or the post-Hall of Fame game edition last Friday was the last one. So we've had a weekend of Hall of Fame festivities. We've had a weekend of the Texans acclimating to being up in Ohio for the week. There's a lot to get into, and I've got a lot of Andre Johnson Hall of Fame questions. So rather than just go through a litany of mailbag questions that largely cover the same things, I will start off by giving my thoughts on Andre Johnson and the Hall of Fame ceremony, the induction ceremony, and Andre in general on the weekend, and then we'll get into the mailbag. A quick reminder on a couple of things before we get into the meat of the podcast is to hit the subscribe button. If you have been frequenting the Utopia Football Podcast for a while now and you've not hit the subscribe button, it's a really good time to do it. We're into games now, so we do a mailbag on Tuesdays. We do a preview episode usually on Thursday or Friday. This week it'll be on Thursday because the game is on Friday, and then I always do an episode following the game with winners and losers that you get shortly after the game ends, and that's true throughout the entire season. So hit the subscribe button, and I'm not averse to doing emergency episodes if required. If the Texans were to make a big trade or something like that in the middle of the week, I jump on here and I'll get my thoughts out on that here on the Utopia Football Podcast. It's a great time to be a Texan fan, great time to subscribe to the podcast. Also, a reminder, if you want to hit me with a question for the mailbag, for next week's mailbag, houmailbag@gmail.com, houmailbag@gmail.com. So let's get right into it, and I'll start off with the Hall of Fame ceremony, the Hall of Fame induction ceremony for Andre this weekend. I thought he was perfection. I thought Andre Johnson did a great job. I think you can make an argument that he had the best speech out of anybody there. I thought it was just a textbook Hall of Fame speech, just under 15 minutes. He actually had the shortest of all the speeches out there, or all the speeches. I timed them. I'm into that kind of thing. His was from the time he said thank you to the time in the beginning where he said thank you for the applause, to the time at the very end where he said that he is happy as hell to be the first Hall of Famer for Houston Texan fans. 14 minutes and 18 seconds, man. That's a great Hall of Fame speech length. I will credit all of the inductees that they were all anywhere between Andre at 14:18, and the longest one was Devin Hester, who went almost 18 minutes. I thought Hester's speech was good. I thought that feels like how I felt about Devin Hester's speech. It felt like he kind of went on a little long. But I thought all the inductees, by and large, did a great job. My favorite things about Andre's speech, other than just the heartfelt sentiments throughout it, I thought he really took us on his journey in a brief period of time. His journey from Miami and Miami High, how he wound up at Miami High, that his mom suggested going to a school outside of the district that he was being raised in, and that would challenge him both athletically and academically. And as it turns out, she was right about that. Andre gave his mom a lot of credit for that. But I thought it was really, he just kind of took us along for the ride from his upbringing in Miami to being at the University of Miami, his dream school, on perhaps the best college football team in the history of the sport, the early 2000 Butch Davis / Larry Coker, I guess, Miami Hurricanes. And then the thanking of his entire family, I thought was really good. So yeah, to me, the highlights were him taking us through his high school, his high school career. The telestrator went out in the middle of the in the middle of Andre's speech. And if you go back and watch, you can tell when the moment was the telestrator went out. If you had not known the telestrator went out, Andre, there was a long pause before he started talking about his mom. And you would have just thought it was him gathering his emotions before talking about his mother, who is one of the most important people in his life. But if you did know the telestrator went out, you can almost tell that Andre was just much looser and shooting from the hip, not shooting from the hip, but speaking off the cuff, speaking much more naturally and organically than the early part of the speech, where you could tell he was not in a bad way, but you could tell he was giving a speech. He was reading off the telestrator. I just thought it was tremendous. There's a lot of people that would freak out when that happened, and Andre just went with the flow, kind of like he did for his 12 years as a Houston Texan. The highlights of the speech, also the story of his sister, who he didn't meet until he was 21 years old. Andre's dad was not in his life as a child. Turns out that his dad had a daughter from a different relationship that Andre knew about but had never talked to. So when his dad passed, his sister April reached out to him and talked to him for the first time. That was kind of a very emotional scene. And I know for a lot of you, we're reliving this. I'm just telling you what parts I thought were really, really good in this speech. If you haven't seen the speech yet, it's 14 minutes, well worth watching, especially if you're a Houston Texan fan. But that was a tough one, man. She was very emotional, as was Andre. They've clearly become very close since she's become a part of his life, and she was there at the ceremony. So I think that tells a lot as well. Andre said multiple times that he's happy as hell. If that doesn't become a shirt by somebody out there, whether it's Running Game or whether it's Tomorrow's Retro or any of the other t-shirt making outlets here in town, you're missing the boat on that one. I think an Andre Johnson t-shirt that says I'm happy as hell, either on the front or back of it, I would wear that, provided it's good material. That's a big thing. I need it to be soft cotton material. I don't need like nowadays, the old school t-shirts almost feel like burlap. So I will pay extra for the thin cotton, not super tight on you, kind of loose. So someone needs to make that. His saluting of the fans was great. It was heartfelt. Just Andre was tremendous. We got into a discussion, and actually, I had several mailbag questions about Andre. Do you think Andre regrets, either staying with the Texans through all the building and the downtimes? The Texans were not a good football team until year 9 of Andre's career. Other than that, he was carrying either bad football teams or mediocre football teams throughout his career. Do you think he had any regret over that? I would imagine slipping on that gold jacket, that any regret he had in doing that probably washed away with that. I think a lot of the reason why Andre got into the Hall of Fame is because he was carrying an expansion franchise on his back. You got to think about this. It feels like Andre's been in a battle the last 3 years for a spot in the Hall of Fame with really 2 other guys, maybe 3. Reggie Wayne for sure, Torrey Holt for sure, maybe Steve Smith, but certainly the first 2. And they've been eligible longer than Andre has, believe it or not. Or they've been finalists more times than Andre. I think Andre got in on his 3rd, and they both, Reggie Wayne and Torrey Holt, were in their 5th trip to being a finalist this past time. And so Andre really jumped over those guys. There's a thought that in the Hall of Fame, or with the Hall of Fame in football, and I've talked to John McClain many, many times about this, that at certain positions, unless you're just an elite first balloter and then you just jump past everybody regardless of position, if you're in a battle at a position for Hall of Fame accolades, then it really turns into almost like you're at a deli where you've chosen a number and you're the next one up, that kind of thing. So that Andre jumped over Reggie Wayne and Torrey Holt, I actually think him playing for the Texans made for a stronger case for Andre Johnson getting into the Hall of Fame. In a weird way, him playing for a team that was largely bad or mediocre for a majority of his career, I think helped Andre jump Torrey Holt, whose best years were part of maybe the greatest offense in the history of the sport, and Reggie Wayne, who played with arguably the greatest quarterback, or certainly one of the greatest quarterbacks of the modern era, in Peyton Manning. And both of those guys had Hall of Fame receivers on the other side. Isaac Bruce with Torrey Holt, Marvin Harrison with Reggie Wayne, and they both had Hall of Fame running backs. Marshall Faulk with Torrey Holt, Edgerrin James with Reggie Wayne. So I've had people ask that to me, like, boy, can you imagine if Andre had played for such and such team? I don't know who the team would have been. I'd have to go back and look and see, if he had played with, Tom Brady or something, whatever, some team better than the Texans, which there were plenty of back then. Boy, can you imagine the numbers he would have put up? I don't know that he would have put up better numbers if he's playing with another receiver that's his level on the other side. Certainly they would have won a ton of games, but that's the irony in the candidacy of Andre Johnson to me, is that I think him playing for the Texans actually helped get him into the Hall of Fame. And him being a solo act helped get him into the Hall of Fame. Him playing his best years with David Carr, at times Sage Rosenfels, a lot of it Matt Schaub, but at other times Case Keenum later on, that he played with really kind of a jagged set of quarterbacks, or best case, he had Matt Schaub, who was a good but not great quarterback. Again, to me, it feeds everything with Andre's candidacy. And oh, by the way, go look at the highlights. Nobody's got a better highlight reel than Andre Johnson. Some of the circus catches he made are just ridiculous. So those are my thoughts on Andre. Well earned. Salute. I'm glad he got in now. It was really, once we got to this one, his third time as a finalist, I really did feel like we were going to have to buckle up. I thought there'd be a debate as to who would get in first, J.J. Watt or Andre Johnson. J.J. becomes eligible in 2028. Here we are in 2024. And I really thought heading into this past go-round, which Andre ended up getting in on, before we knew he got in, I thought we could be waiting a while for Andre to get in once he missed out the first couple of times. Fortunately, not the case. Great weekend, and we'll do it all again in 2028. Hopefully, we're all here for it, man. For J.J. Watt going in, that one will be easier to plan for. J.J.'s first ballot. J.J. we won't have to wait around for a second year or a third year. He and Tom Brady will be going in 2028. I'm all for either one of them coming back and unretiring, because I'd rather not spend the weekend in Canton. I do plan to go to this one, JJ, when it happens, as opposed to Andre. I wasn't able to go. I'd rather not spend it with a bunch of drunk Patriot fans in Canton. That doesn't sound like fun to me. But we'll look forward to that down the road. All right, let's get into the mailbag. HOU mailbag at gmail.com. The other thing that I've got a lot of questions on is just training camp in general with the Texans. So I'll lead off on the mailbag without a specific email about training camp, and just to say that it sounds like up in Ohio, the offense has kind of found its rhythm again, or at least they did on Monday. The last 4 practices they had before the Hall of Fame game were very, very defensive centric. The defense was winning fairly noticeably in those practices. Now, the offense did get things straightened out on Monday, but that was with both Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter out for that practice. D'Amico Ryan said not to be worried about either guy. Danielle Hunter was actually back at practice on Tuesday this morning. Will was not. But it was just good to see some of the clips, but then hear some of the accounts of practice up in Ohio about the offense getting kind of back in its groove. Not that I'm worried about the offense. I think this team's going to score a shit ton of points this year. But I like knowing that they're actually playing well, So there were a lot of guys sitting out practice today, some injured. Joe Mixon's still not practicing. I would say that's concerning, except I've watched him work out in the practices that he's missed, and he looks really good. Maybe they're just taking it easy on him. Laramie Tunsil's still not practicing. We've been told Laramie's going to be ready to go for week 1. Christian Harris is the one that's a big mystery right now. It's some sort of soft tissue injury, but he has yet to practice at training camp this year. Mixon and Tunsil, I'm not worried about. Harris is still a young player. He's still a third-year guy who D'Amico Ryans even said in a press conference this past offseason that he viewed 2023 as Harris's rookie year, because you can just throw away the Lovie Smith year with Christian Harris. So that one's concerning to me, just because Christian Harris is viewed as a vital cog for this defense. Linebacker is not a deep position for this team, and Christian Harris needs to get back on the football field. So those are kind of the bigger names that have been out consistently here. Other than that, like Kamari Lassiter is out today. I'm hoping that's not something serious. So a few other guys, Jeff Okuda out. I don't have the list in front of me, it doesn't appear that there are any major injuries right now with this team. Even Tegan Catoriano, who got hurt in the Hall of Fame game, and it was feared that it was a knee because he got carted off. It turns out it's a calf injury, and he should be able to come back from it. So without being able to watch these practices, unlike the podcasts I do after each practice here in Houston, where I lay out all my thoughts on the practice, I'm not able to see the practice in Ohio. So I'm just kind of giving you my thoughts on guys who are in, guys who are out, and what we're hearing from up there. But there's a lot of good people who are up in Ohio right now watching these practices. I would encourage you. The ones I've seen, Cody Stutes is up there. So he's excellent. He's been on this podcast many times. HOUfootball.com is where you can find him. All right, let's get into some of the specific emails from you guys. Steven from League City said, "What's up, Sean? I'm currently watching the Hall of Fame game, loving the new uniforms, and I notice on certain parts of the uniform that the logo is backwards. I saw on one side of the helmet for sure, but on the pants as well, especially when Fairbairn was kicking the field goal. Who thought this looked good, was a good idea? I think it looks terrible and it wouldn't take much to change it. Please explain to me the logic of the decision. Thanks, and keep up the great work." Got a couple PSs I'll get to here. I'll be honest, I didn't even notice that. Did anybody else out there notice that? I didn't notice that the logo was backwards, that the bull. I could see that though, like if you're putting one on each side of the helmet, kind of having an inverse going there. So Steven, I would be lying if I said that this bothers me, because you telling me about it, I haven't even gone back and looked at the film of the Hall of Fame game to see if that's even the case. But if it is, I'm not that worked up about it. It's certainly not something that I can remember them highlighting when they unveiled the, and believe me, they highlighted plenty of the things in there. There's so many, especially on the alternative uniforms. There's so many little subtle Easter eggs to Houston, to the mascot. I think it's pretty cool. No, not worked up about that, Steven. Sorry about that. P.S. Any idea when you will get a co-host, or do you like going at it solo on the podcast? I like doing it solo. It's really, honestly, more than anything else, it's just easier from a scheduling standpoint. I've done solo shows for years on the CBS Sports Radio Network. I stopped doing them last year because I wanted to have my Sundays back. But I've done solo shows, even predating being at Sports Radio 610. I hosted a midday solo show on the Yahoo Sports Radio Network. So I'm not uncomfortable doing a solo show, especially when you have mailbag questions and things like that. It's almost like the equivalent of taking phone calls and whatnot. So I like doing it solo. I like the convenience of doing it solo. The company has taught me how to go ahead and just hit play and record it myself. And then my producer, Anthony Irwin, is able to post it. So I say all that to say, probably not a co-host anytime soon, unless the company encourages me to have one. If they feel like it would make the podcast better, then maybe so. That's also another person that I would theoretically need to split money with. And there's that as well. But I'm all for making the podcast sound better. So hopefully, Steven, you're listening to it. So hopefully you like it the way it is. And this is where I can tell that you like it the way it is, because the second PS, we need some merch. We do. I've thought about that. Payne and Pendergast merch, Utopia merch. We do need merch. I don't know how much we would move, but people walking around out there with a little Utopia on their persons would be great. Steven, appreciate you sending in the email. Dennis from Budapest, Hungary, just started the second half of the game. He's rewatching the game when he's typing this, but here's a quick one for you. Did you notice /why do Jacob Phillips and Cam Akers both wear number 22? Yeah, one's on defense, one's on offense. What if they both play special teams, et cetera, et cetera? Now that's the preseason for you. Fun times, all the best. Again, man, you guys have eagle eyes going on this thing. I didn't even notice that, Cam Akers and Jacob Phillips. And I went and checked after I got this email. I've never seen that on an NFL team before. Two guys with the same jersey number. But yeah, one's offense, one's defense. So you don't have to worry about them being on the field. I wouldn't worry about Cam Akers being out there on special teams with Jake, and I wouldn't worry about somebody throwing a flag on it in the preseason either. I don't even think the opposing team would care or even notice that there's two number 22s out there. I only read that email because it's different. I've never seen that before, but I double checked the Texans roster. Two number 22s on there. Appreciate the email, Dennis. Hope everything is great overseas. Man, I get a lot of emails from people London and Liverpool and Budapest and Monterrey, Mexico. It's a global podcast, baby. It's a global podcast. Wouldn't be a mailbag without Joe Q emailing in. He said, you've spoken a couple times about how refreshing it is for the Texans to have continuity of coaching staff, starting QB, GM for the first time in a long time. How is training camp different for a team with continuity than a team that is hitting Control Alt Delete? That's a great question. I will just tell you that I'll give you my standpoint and then what I feel like it is and what I've heard players talk about it is with the continuity. And Bobby Slowick talked about it as well. For me personally, as a fan, it's just comforting. After you go through 4 years like 2020, 2021, 2022, and then D'Amico getting here in 2023, you start to get a bit of a scalded dog thing going on where you're just expecting the next bad thing to be lurking around the corner. And it felt comforting and it felt weird and all of those things when you get out to the first practice and it's almost literally the same coaching staff. I know there's been a few tweaks and changes, but the guys that matter on the coaching staff, no disrespect to a lot of the position coaches, but to me, the most important coaches other than D'Amico Ryans in order are Bobby Slowick, offensive coordinator, Gerard Johnson, quarterback coach, Frank Ross, special teams coach. And then I'm going to put Matt Burke fourth on that list, only because D'Amico, I believe, is the play caller for the defense. It's almost like Matt Burke is like a special assistant to D'Amico Ryans in coordinating the defense. And if I'm off on that, then people will tell me. But D'Amico calls the defenses on game day. So that's why I put Burke a little below. Plus, Frank Ross is elite at his job. I don't think anybody would debate the other two, that Slowick and Gerard Johnson being the two most important, given the precious cargo that is CJ Stroud. So I say all that to say that it's just it's comforting as a fan to not be hitting Control Alt Delete. Slowick himself said that it speeds up everything, that there's continuity in the staff. It helps CJ. There's no new language that the quarterback needs to learn. The playbook is the same. I'm sure they're adding new wrinkles to it, maybe changing some of the wording and the verbiage to it, but largely it's the same. You have more time. You're not spending practices doing the same level of install as you would have been in year one. So that lends itself to being able to do whatever coaches do, self-scouting, coming up with different schemes, being able to watch film. Anything that reduces the amount of time that you have to invest at a certain given thing opens up free time for you to do other stuff. So I think it's great. I think it's great for everybody involved. And Joe Q, you go on to ask several more questions about the continuity, but I think that kind of sums it up for me, is comfort for the fan base and a lot more efficiency for the coaching staff. I think it's great. Plus, they're all good coaches in my mind. Continuity isn't that great when they're bringing back scrubs. Like we saw that with Bill O'Brien. Not so much with Bill himself. I don't think Bill was a bad football coach. I think he was a decent football coach. I think he was an awful GM, but I don't think his staff was great. He had some good coaches on his staff, but I thought his staff was just a bunch of lingerers that kind of followed him around from job to job. I'm not into that. So, all right, let's keep it moving. Charles Honeycutt. What are your thoughts on the Madden ratings for CJ, Nico, and Titus Howard? Fair or unfair? I am into the Madden ratings in so much as I love seeing the reaction to them. I don't play Madden, so I don't play video games at all. I used to. It's honestly, video games for me I treat like a drug. Yeah, I wouldn't say I have an addictive personality. But I do know that there's certain things that if I just started doing them, I would keep doing them. And one of them is playing video games, especially as good as these video games look these days. So sorry, my son's calling me on the phone. Hang on. Well, I'll call him back. The Madden scores. Yeah. So I don't play Madden, so I'm not upset about it. My hope is that CJ is upset about it. CJ only got an 81. For those who don't follow or those who weren't aware, I'm guessing if you play Madden, anybody who plays Madden listens to this podcast knows that CJ got an 81. And 99 is the best you can get. Pat Mahomes got a 99 again this year. I guess just for context, that 81 puts CJ fairly far down the list. And if you're looking at certain, this is all off of memory for me because I remember reading lists. Tua Tagovailoa had an 88 and CJ has an 81. That's bullshit. Like that's horse shit. There's nothing about Tua Tagovailoa's game that is better than CJ Stroud. Nothing. Arm strength, accuracy, size, athleticism, leadership, intangibles, nothing. Zero. CJ Stroud checks every box ahead of Tua Tagovailoa, and Tua has an 88. So it is what it is. I think some of what factors in is age with players. And by the way, if I'm not mistaken, you Madden people can tell me in an email, or if you want to hit me on Twitter at Sean T. Pendergast. But I believe they update these things throughout the year, right? You have downloads and things like that. I mean, the internet's a beautiful thing. So and then Nico, I think Nico has been, forget about Madden score. Like, I think he's generally been disrespected this year with a lot of the rankings and the lists and things like that. Maybe some of that has to do with now Stephon Diggs is here. So Stephon Diggs is attracting some of the wide receiver attention away from Nico Collins. I think Nico has the makings of a top 10 receiver. He had a top 10 season last year. He was statistically great last year on PFF, where they measure things like blocking and all, how often you get open and things like that. A lot of intangibles. He was third among wide receivers on PFF. Nico Collins is a great young wide receiver. So I didn't see him on any of the lists that had the scores over 90. So I don't know what his score was. Nico is a guy that he doesn't strike me as a huge chip on the shoulder guy, but maybe he will be. Titus Howard hated his score. His score is a 71, which is also his jersey number. He hated his score. He just laughed at it on social media. But Titus gets easily upset about stuff like that, not only for himself, but for teammates as well. So I will give him credit about that. But my suggestion to Titus would be just don't worry about it. But maybe he uses it as fuel as well. So those are my thoughts on it. I'm more intrigued by their thoughts on their own score than my score. I think the CJ score especially, I think, is horseshit. Charles also says, after the Tampa series, it seems like we need more consistent batters at the plate. No Kyle Tucker plays a factor. If you were GM, what changes would you make? There aren't really any. The trade deadline has come and gone. They've cut the guys that are the dead weight on this roster. Dana Brown has said it. The only thing that's really left to do is call guys up from the minor leagues and see what they can do. Give John Singleton some rest by bringing up Shea Whitcomb or Zach DeCenzo. So there's not a lot that you can do. I think they've got to hope Tucker comes back. I'm getting less and less optimistic about that by the day. And they've got to hope that Verlander comes back at peak Verlander level and that they maybe go win this thing with pitching, because their lineup is a lot of trash right now. Like, there is a big drop off after spot number 4 in this lineup. All right, hang on. I got to get this. This is my son. Hey. It's Avalon Diner. Yeah, 11:30. The one on Westheimer. I'm recording my podcast right now, so this conversation is going to wind up in the podcast. That's okay. I'll see you there in about 10 minutes. Bye. All right. You guys got to experience that. My son leaves for Paris tomorrow to go to the Olympics. He just got done taking the bar. And we're going to lunch. Me and Sammy and my former Utopia co-host John McClain are breaking bread over at Avalon Diner. Back to the Astros. Yeah, if I were the GM, what changes would I make, Charles? I don't know. I think I would turn back the hands of time and not do the Jose Abreu contract. I would magically take my hands like Mr. Miyagi and I'd rub them together and I'd put them on Kyle Tucker's shin and I would heal his shin the way that Mr. Miyagi healed Daniel LaRusso's knee in the first Karate Kid movie. There's not much to do. I mean, you're just this time of year, unless teams are cutting guys or they're waiving guys, then there's really not much you can do because there's only one trade deadline now. The other trade deadline on August 31st, that vanished. But that was the trade deadline that they picked up Verlander back in 2017, which is still incredible to think about because the two trade deadlines, the July 31st one was always just you can trade whoever you want to. The August 31st trade deadline was always you had to put a guy through waivers. You had to clear waivers. And it's amazing to think back now that nobody put in a claim on Justin Verlander back in 2017 and think about what he has become post 2017. Like, he went on to win 2 more Cy Young awards after that, win 2 World Series. It's remarkable that in retrospect, even a team like the Yankees, who the Astros beat in the playoffs that year and every year um, since then, that they wouldn't have put in a claim on Verlander. Again, the Tigers then could pull him off of the waiver wire and work out a trade, but that would have blocked the Astros from being able to trade for him. Appreciate the email, Charles. France in the North emailing in. Now that Andre is in the Hall of Fame and this team continues to build upon making their own history, do you ever look back and think about how you were there since the inception of where the team started to where it is now? I don't, for one reason. I wasn't in Houston when the Texans first took the field back in 2002. I moved away from here in 2001. I moved to Denver for 3 years and then Chicago 3 years after that. And then I moved back here in 2007 to get into radio. And that's when I started covering the Texans. So my frame of reference for the Texans is a little different than people who've been in Houston a long time. Certainly people who were in Houston like I was back when the team was first awarded to Houston. I was living here for that. I was living here when they chose the name Texans, but I moved away before the team had the expansion draft and drafted David Carr and all of those things. I missed the first 5 seasons, which is kind of ironic considering those are the 5 seasons that my co-host played for the Texans, Seth Payne. But France, I'll be honest, I don't. What I do think back to a lot nowadays is just 2 and 3 years ago and where this franchise was back in 2020 and particularly 2021 and 2022. I go back and relive that a lot. I have gone back and watched old David Culley press conferences and thought to myself, I cannot believe this man got hired for the same job that D'Amico Ryans has. And I'm trying not to be disrespectful of David Culley. My guess is he doesn't listen to this podcast. And he seems like a genuinely fine human being, but he had no business coaching an NFL football team. And so I do go back and think about that a lot and think about how quickly things have turned for this team. And then subsequently think about, okay, we can't get too comfortable with all this, right? So, yeah. So that's where I am on that. France also says, with Autry out for those 6 games, who do you see being the beneficiary of getting those reps? I think Jerry Hughes, may have been specifically signed to take some of those defensive end reps that Danico Autry was going to take. I think we'll see more conventional defensive tackles getting reps, even on passing downs. On passing downs, Danico Autry was going to and will still, come week 7, bump inside. But I think now you'll see guys that can get a push up front on passing downs. Got Khalil Davis makes things happen. Mario Edwards has had a really, really good camp in terms of making things happen in that interior. So I think those are going to be guys who you see benefiting from that. Chris in the ATL, last one. D'Amico said starters will play Friday against the Steelers. True or false, Stroud and Tunsil are a mandatory pairing for playing, meaning if Tunsil isn't out there, CJ better not be out there. I'm kind of that school of thought. I just know it's not going to happen, so I don't get too worked up about it. I suppose if something were to happen to CJ, boy, that would be a hell of a podcast to listen to after the game. I think they're going to be okay. Blake Fisher has been working against Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter all camp long. My guess is that CJ is only going to be out there for a series, maybe 2, and I don't know that they're going to put him in a position to where he's going to get smoked like that. I would think maybe they throw some help to Blake Fisher's side if he's lined up, say, over Alex Highsmith. I don't think TJ Watt will be lined up over Blake Fisher just because those are that's not the side he normally plays on. And we don't know if the Steelers are using their starters yet, or at least I don't know as of right now. Maybe Mike Tomlin has addressed it. So I don't think they're inextricably linked. And the fact of the matter is, there'll probably be a game or 2 this season that CJ is going to have to play with a left tackle not named Laramie Tunsil. So, yeah, but I get what you're saying, Chris, in the preseason. Fun Sean question. Is there a food pairing that you must have together in order to enjoy, like ketchup and fries or butter and popcorn? I don't know that it's necessarily a pairing, but I put Chick-fil-A sauce on everything. And if you guys have had Chick-fil-A sauce, you know what I'm talking about. It's fucking awesome. The orange kind of goopy sauce. They sell it at supermarkets. It's, we get it at Kroger and H-E-B. They sell it there. You can order it on Amazon. And the container's usually nice and big. There's a lot in there. So I don't have a specific pairing, although with fries, popcorn and butter, yes. I'm just using the two. Fries, I like dipping them in a combo of ketchup and mayonnaise. I combine ketchup and mayonnaise, or sometimes I'll combine ketchup and mustard, but it's usually for me not just ketchup. It's ketchup and something else swirled together. But I'm telling you, I put Chick-fil-A sauce on tacos. I put Chick-fil-A sauce on hamburgers. I'll dip fries in Chick-fil-A sauce. I'll dip chips in Chick-fil-A sauce. I fucking love Chick-fil-A sauce, man. So it's my combination, Chris, is Chick-fil-A sauce and everything. How you like that? All right, that's it. I got to go eat lunch with my son and John McClain. So we are done. A reminder, if you want to send an email in, houmailbag@gmail.com, and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. I appreciate all of you. I'll be back on Thursday for a preview of Friday's game between the Texans and the Steelers. In the meantime, have a great week. Thanks to Anthony Irwin, my producer, for getting this out to you. Thank you to all of you for listening. Tell a friend. It's going to be a great season, and they can hear all about it right here on the Utopia Football Podcast. Have a great day, everybody.